Good afternoon. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, can indeed.
Great, thank you. Yes, hello everyone, and welcome to the latest in our webinar series. This is actually the 15th of our webinars, and with the aim of bringing together researchers and practitioners in NFM. Today we're really pleased to have Jon Hollis from the Environment Agency joining us. Jon's the NFM Programme Manager. Before I hand over to Jon, I've just got a couple of housekeeping details and a very brief introduction to or overview of the NFM research programme. Hi, I'm Gerard Stewart, by the way. I'm the communications coordinator for the research programme. So please could you keep your microphones muted to avoid background noise, and turn your videos off. They can be distracting for other participants. The webinar is being recorded, so I need to let you know that for GDPR purposes. Also to let you know that it's available. It will be available alongside all the other webinar recordings on our website. So we'll get that up there within the next few days. Please do ask questions and use the chat function to do that, and also respond to other people's questions and comments. And we've had some lively discussions while the webinars have been going on, so yeah, please make the most of that. And thanks to those of you who sent in questions beforehand. We'll cover some of those afterwards. So after Jon's presentation, we'll have 15 minutes or so for questions. So the research programme, it's a 4-year, £4 million NERC funded programme, and our aim is to carry out novel science to improve the understanding of NFM where possible, including quantification. We're looking at a range of NFM measures in different types of catchments, flooding scenarios, and at different scales. And our goal is to improve the evidence and understanding for policymakers and practitioners. And there are 3 projects that make up the programme in different parts of the country, and looking at slightly different aspects of NFM in different geographical backgrounds. Working with partners is a really important part of our work. Apologies if I've missed off partners from that group. There's a very large number of people and organisations that we're working with, and they're critical to the success of our research. And really, the webinar programme is part of that. We're helping to help build a community really of people working in NFM. And today is an example of that, in the sense that Jon and the Environment Agency, whilst they're a really important partner in our work, what Jon's going to talk about isn't the research programme itself, but is obviously closely linked to it. So I think that's enough from me. I'll hand over to Jon.
Afternoon, everybody. I'm just going to open the presentation and come up nicely on screen for you all. Also, I think my camera is on. Somebody might be able to tell me. I can't tell this end.
Yeah,
Excellent. Just before the call, I had a bit of a technology failure, and so I'm using my own laptop, and I've not used it for Teams before, and I seem to have a few extra functions than I would have had on my my work kit. So it's all slightly different. Well, thank you for that introduction, Gerard. I don't think I've ever had 14 warm-up acts before I've given a presentation or presented something to such a group. So it's really good that this is in a really good series of things, as you say, to kind of help make NFM more of an everyday choice. And that's what really my goal is to try and make natural flood management an everyday choice for all. I don't think many of you, well, I guess many of you will have read parts of the FCRM strategy, and I'll mention that a little bit later on. But we've got a good number of properties at flood risk across the UK. It's more than 5 million. When flooding happens, people are out of their homes for quite a long while. I just got some background noise there. I just wondered if whoever that was could mute, please. More for the recording than for me. So people are out of their house for a long time. There's lots of money invested in the repair and rebuild and rehoming of people while they're out of their space. Businesses are out of their property and premises for a long time. And with climate change happening, we're seeing that happen more and more often, and there is no way that we can continue to engineer our way out of these things with hard engineering. And you'll have heard comments from the chair of the Environment Agency, Emma Howard-Boyd, saying that we may need to consider relocating communities and people at some point in those situations. I do think that natural flood management has a massive role to play in delivering some of or overcoming some of those challenges, particularly around climate change. And it might not.
Hi, Jon. Sorry to interrupt you. I can hear some background noise as well. Please, could everyone make sure their microphones are switched off? If it carries on, I could mute all and you could turn on again. But let's try continuing.
Thank you. Yeah, so I think that natural flood management certainly will help to help us overcome some of those challenges that we see in the future. And so what I'm going to try and tell you a little bit about today is the Natural Flood Management Programme. So what happened before, what some of the evidence and how we got to have some evidence about natural flood management, the strategic context, so a little bit more about the policies that are out there at the moment and what's coming. How we can integrate natural flood management into our work. The NFM programme more specifically will be in there. The learning that we've got from that, and I just wanted to share this graphic with you at the bottom right of the screen, because I think that this is quite a nice way of explaining how lots of the measures that we deliver in natural flood management, and in fact in flood risk management in general terms, the stuff that we do out on the ground sits on a spectrum. So you've got natural recovery at one end and hard engineering on the other end. And I think that natural flood management generally sits in around the kind of the middle of that somewhere. So some natural recovery, absolutely, we do some of that, but we also do some softer engineering. And maybe that's possibly where more of the SUDS type thing sits before you go to those hard engineered solutions, which I don't think we can necessarily argue are natural flood management type interventions. So that's where we're going to go. I've seen some of the questions that you have put forward before the presentation. I'm going to try and answer most of them. If you are here to say to expect what have we learned from the NFM programme, and for me to show you hydrographs of where things have changed, I'll tell you now, I'm going to disappoint you. I'm talking more about what we've learned about how to deliver some of these things, because the research is still going on about how the measures are performing in the landscape. So just to manage your expectations up front, that's what I'm looking to talk about today. Thought from a number of conversations I've had with various people around, we kind of use three terms interchangeably in the UK at the moment. We talk about natural flood management, we talk about nature-based solutions, we talk about working with natural processes. And when people have come to me and said, well, what do you mean? Why are we using these terms interchangeably? I tried to explain, and this was what I came up with. So working with natural processes is the broad term that we use for any work that protects, restores and emulates natural processes. I see nature-based solutions as a subset of that, and the definition there comes from the UN. and it says about actions to protect, sustain, manage, and restore restore natural or modified ecosystems that address societal changes effectively and adaptively. And you can read the rest of it. The point is that I think actually all my slides have disappeared. Somebody just tried to present over the top of me there. Hopefully that's back and people can see that slide again.
You
Gerard?
can see the connection between, yes, you've got your vendor programs back, yeah.
Yep, excellent. So so I think that probably the outline of nature-based solutions and working with natural processes are far more closely aligned than I've shown in this graphic. But the point is that natural flood management is a subset of both of those, which is really doing what both of those do in terms of protect, restore and emulate, but specifically for flood risk. So this is the natural function of catchments, floodplains, and the wider catchment, as I say. So that's where I think that we should start with our language and understand that and try not to use them interchangeably. Although, as I'm sure you'll find in this presentation, I'm likely to do that. Excuse me. So before the programme, we got the money for the NFM programme in the late part of 2016. Before that, there'd been a handful of projects around the country. Many of you probably heard a little bit about some of these. So Honeycott, Pickering, Belford, Stroud, and there's some pictures there that are taken from the Working with Natural Processes Evidence Directory to show what they were doing. But in general terms, these were these are quite small areas that they're delivering the works over. And I think while locally there is confidence in these measures, I don't think that a lot of that learning had been absorbed by lots of the risk management authorities, by other communities. And so I don't think that they generated as much of the confidence in natural flood management as we would have liked them to. And that's not saying that these projects have done anything bad. In fact, actually, I think they set us on exactly the right path. But when we got the money from government, we really wanted to try and look at natural flood management on a much larger scale over a bigger area. And that was where we got the money from. And those projects led us to publish the evidence that we had at the time. And so in 2017, we published the Working with Natural Processes Evidence Directory, which you can find on gov.uk. And if you're not using your mobile phone in a moment, I'll give you a QR code so you can jump straight to it. And that evidence directory consists of three things: the evidence directory itself, the maps and the gaps. The evidence directory has three parts to it: one-page summary of each of the 14 natural flood management measures, what's the word for it? Literature review, and a quick summary of some of the case studies that are around natural flood management. The maps are quite often referred to as the opportunity maps, and they're published on the internet. I prefer the term potential maps because opportunity suggests that that's exactly what we want to do and where we want to do it. But what they actually do is using some very high-level data, national data sets, is give an indication of what could be done in an area. And of course, that needs lots of agreement with landowners, with consenting authorities and such like. So just because the maps are out there, they are potential maps, not opportunity maps, because they show the potential of where things could be done. And then the gaps, we were really keen to understand and describe what we didn't know about natural flood management and what we needed to test. And so the Natural Flood Management Programme, the 15 million from government, was designed to look at trying to address some of those gaps. And I'll come on to that in a moment. I talked briefly about the 14 measures for natural flood management. This is how we've defined what measures we mean when we talk about natural flood management measures. And you can see on this graphic taken from the evidence directory that we have certain types of work that probably work best in the upper reaches of the catchment. So your leaky structures, your headwater drainage, cross slope woodland. In the middle of the catchment, those lower reaches towards the tidal end, river restoration, online, offline storage ponds, soil and land management. floodplain woodland, and then on the coast and estuaries we can do work there that falls under the working with natural processes or natural flood management banner in beach management, sand dunes, salt marsh, mudflats, and managed realignment schemes. So that gives you an indication of where we of what those measures are. I'm being asked to give control to somebody, so I'm going to deny while I'm carrying on. So that gives you an idea of the types of measures and where they are across the catchment. For me, this diagram is really powerful for a couple of reasons. One, it demonstrates that flood management activities don't necessarily need to be on or adjacent to the watercourses that we've tended to do a lot of our flood risk management activities, particularly catchment woodland, cross slope woodland. They give you that perspective that you can look across the broader sense of the catchment. And the other thing about this is that I think it really does help us to see, when you're looking at work in the upper reaches, that that's probably not always going to be on main rivers. And the importance of that is the Environment Agency look after the main rivers and generally look at putting their funding towards the main rivers that we look after, which is reasonable and right. But this is an opportunity for us to think more broadly about the whole catchment and investing in places that we wouldn't normally have invested in before to reduce flood risk in the places that we are looking to reduce the flood risk. I seem to have lost control of my presentation there. So if you've got your mobile phones ready, here is a QR code. Simply open the camera app, point it at the screen, and it will take you to the evidence directory. A quick Google search of working with natural processes evidence directory will also take you there. And I think that it's a really good source of information. And as you'll see through the presentation, we are looking to update it as a result of what's going on with the NFM programme as well. I'll just pause for a second. Hopefully everybody's had time to get the link working. The evidence directory also has a bit more information in there about each of the measures, and I thought that this it was important to highlight this. This is around the snapshot for the floodplain woodland. And what this does is it shows what benefits you can get over and above the flood risk elements. So I quite like the wind diagram there that kind of tells you about relative benefits that you would get by delivering this type of intervention. And then it gives you more of a description and a summary below that. Remember that those wind diagram, the rows there, circular graph, is about relative benefits. So it's not as clear cut as saying, if I do this, then I will get exactly that, and it being very identified and quantified and very easy to monetize. What this does is it says we would expect that you would get an increase in habitat benefits from what you're doing. So take woodland, as you can see there, you do get some improvements in air quality, but you get better return in terms of the ecosystem services benefits for climate regulation. So it's that kind of thing which can really help to generate the benefits that you are using to justify the project if you're looking for government funding. Of course, other funding sources may choose other routes or other methods to define what they want to pay for. So let's bring you a little bit closer to where we are with the strategic context for natural flood management. Now, a couple of years ago, the government delivered their 25-year environment plan, or published it, it's probably a better word, because it's going to take 25 years to deliver. The overall aim of this, as I'm sure many of you are aware, is about leaving the environment in a better state for the next generation than we found it. And I think the headlines, when they hit, they were about plastic cups, plastic bags from supermarkets, microplastics in the oceans, which are all really, really important. But what didn't hit the headlines were all the other things that were in there, including references to taking more action to reduce the risk from harm from flooding and coastal erosion, and making greater use of natural flood management solutions. And there were other references through there as well, using more natural flood management solutions where appropriate. There is a there's some kind of actions and targets and things throughout that document. I'm not quite sure if targets is the right word, but some things that we want to achieve on the journey to delivering a better environment for the next generation. And one of them was to learn from the Natural Flood Management Programme. And that's probably one of the first actions that we can actually deliver as a nation, as a society. And so I do keep getting regular questions to me about what have you done on the Natural Flood Management Programme, and does that lend itself to having delivered some of the things within the 25-year environment plan. So this is very real, and that is the high level kind of government direction that we've got for the programme. Last year, we, the Environment Agency, delivered or published our FCERM strategy, which talks about three main themes: climate resilient places, and within that, making use of nature-based solutions. Today's growth and infrastructure are resilient in tomorrow's climate. Well, as I say, I think that natural flood management will help us to overcome and mitigate some of those climate change impacts. I also think that by planting more trees and using more natural material, we may find that we can start to soak up more carbon and help to reduce making climate change or accelerating climate change or contributing to climate change in the first days. So I think that natural flood management really has a place to play in that. And the third one is about a nation ready to respond and adapt to flooding and coastal change. And this for me is where I think the partnership element that comes from delivering natural flood management projects really comes into play. And as you'll see later with the learning that we've done so far, engagement, working with others, partnerships, they are all incredibly important and probably the best building block that we can have for delivering natural flood management interventions across our landscape. At the same time that we, the Environment Agency, delivered the FCRM strategy and published that, Defra published their policy statement, and that was on the very same day. There was no accident in that. And what that talks about for natural flood management is harnessing the power of nature to reduce flood and coastal erosion and achieve multiple benefits. This is very much linking that natural flood management can deliver the flood risk reduction, but also lots of other benefits, as we've talked about with the ecosystem services, with climate change and such like. It also notes that while natural flood management measures alone will not mitigate the risks of severe flooding or coastal erosion, they do contribute. So this is this idea that it's not an either or choice. It's very much using natural flood management and hard engineering when they're most appropriate. And in some cases, you will have entirely natural flood management projects. In other cases, you will have entirely hard engineered projects. But if we can make more of them, the natural flood management end of the spectrum, the better. The Flood and Coastal Erosion Risk Management Policy Statement also sets a target of doubling the number of natural flood management projects in the programme. And for me, that means the projects that are within the programme at the moment. So we've got 60 or thereabouts projects in the NFM programme over the 6-year period. We've also identified 40 of our normal projects in our 6-year programme that have an element of natural flood management within them. And I think that we're probably very quite strict on meeting the criteria of what natural flood management has been in the last programme, and I think that many of you might be able to come up with examples around the country that we've not included, and I think that's right, because we've still been on this journey of learning and understanding where we see the boundary on that spectrum of where we are. So we're looking to double that. The 60 plus the 40 is 100. So in the next programme, we're looking for around 200 projects. And I'm already seeing signs that we might get even more than that, contributing to the reduction of flood risk across 336,000 properties, as you'll see later on. There's two important bills that have been progressing through Parliament recently. The Agricultural Bill, which is really important as we leave the EU. And I believe that Chris Utley has or will do a presentation on ELM, so Environment Land Management Scheme. And as we've left the EU, CAP, the Common Agricultural Policy, doesn't have to apply to us in the future, and we would like to make payments to landowners based on the public good they deliver rather than necessarily just on the landholding, and that's why that is incredibly important. The other thing to say about that is that that paying for public good, we potentially talking hundreds of millions of pounds a year that could go on activities that reduce flood risk. Now, either that might be their primary reason for doing that piece of work, or it could be a benefit of doing some other works that it also reduces flood risk. And this might be where in the future some of the money for maintenance of natural flood management interventions could come from. So the agricultural bill is really important. The environment bill is also really important. As we leave Europe, we no longer are reportable to them for some of the measures and targets that we have. So we've got the creation of the Office for Environmental Protection, and the environment bill also is making us look to improve the natural environment and net biodiversity gain. So more of our projects are looking to deliver more biodiversity than they would have done previously. So that's really important as well for where we are within the strategic context of natural flood management. So I've kind of briefly touched on integration of natural flood management and what that means to me. So it could be standalone natural flood management projects in our programme. And this is one of the projects from the NFM programme. This is the River Soar, which is just south of Leicester near Narborough. And you can see over the last year how the scrapes and the storage has worked. I had some pictures sent through of this project yesterday with the wet weather that's happening around the country at the moment, and I couldn't tell where the photo was taken from because there's just water everywhere. It's completely flooded. So these things are there, but that's an entirely standalone project in the programme. The other way of integrating natural flood management within our projects is to do it within the projects themselves. So we've got a couple of projects here where we're using hard and soft engineering to reduce the flood risk. So back to the coastal one there, the sea wall, there is some hard engineering, but also by doing work with looking at a sand engine. So they've put lots of sand in places around the beach and hoping that the tidal processes will move it to where it needs to be to protect the coast as well. So I'm just getting some more background noise, which I know on the recording will be really frustrating for whoever's listening. So if you could mute, that would be fantastic. Thank you. So the Natural Flood Management Programme itself, many of you on the call, I think if I recognise the names correctly, are involved with these projects across the country. And we've got about 60 projects. We've got 58 at the moment. 2 have kind of not been able to deliver as we'd have hoped through the programme, but that's part of learning. The dots across the country there show you that we've got a good spread across the country. A few things that I'd point out about these projects are that the red dots are catchment scale, and that means that they are led by flood risk management authorities, generally the Environment Agency, but we do have a local authority involved in 1 or 2 of them. And we've got local authorities involved with a lot of them, even if it's to handle money and help us with the partnerships with the communities. The blue dots, they are the community scale programs. So they are led by community groups, environmental non-government organisations, charities. And when I say flood groups and community groups, I do mean some of the smaller groups that are a collection of the local residents that are trying to make a difference for their community. A couple of other things to point out on this map is that I think that a lot of people think natural flood management is only the reserve of the rural environment, but as you can see, we've got quite a number of projects in and around London there, so that it can help the urban environment as well. We've also got a couple of projects around the coast. So on the Suffolk coast there, one of them wasn't ever looking to deliver work. It was looking to make sure natural flood management was considered in a strategy. The sand engine, and then we've got some managed realignment and some salt marsh works around the south coasts. So that's where we are. The other thing is to say that the dot just tells you where the projects are. It doesn't necessarily tell you how much money they've had allocated to them. But the story of the NFM programme, as I said much earlier in the call, was to learn about the natural flood management. And because the previous projects, while they'd given us some information, they were at quite a small scale. So we were trying to make them at more of a catchment scale. So the £15 million was given us to put natural flood management in the flood risk management toolbox. And the phrase that I like to use now is that we want to make natural flood management an everyday choice for all. The aims of the programme, in order to achieve that kind of overall objective, were to reduce flood and coastal erosion risk. And I think that's entirely reasonable. It was flood risk money that was given to us after all. But to also update and improve habitats and increase biodiversity, that's really important. Those shared benefits that you get from natural flood management, and trying to detail what they can be. The third thing was about contributing to the research and development, so reducing the evidence gaps that we'd got in the Working with Natural Processes evidence directory, and to promote partnership working. So each of the NFM projects has signed up to those aims. Every one of the projects relies on partnership working. And I think that we thought that that was going to be, kind of the stronghold of the community programme. But actually, the catchment scale projects all rely on local engagement with various rivers trusts, flood groups, community groups, other wildlife charities that all rely on that kind of involvement. Reducing the evidence gaps, that's why, as you'll see in a few minutes' time, why we've asked projects to provide us with quite a bit of information, because we can learn so much more about natural flood management and how to deliver this than just does it make a difference in terms of the hydrograph and how much biodiversity is increased as a result of these projects. So using that broader opportunity is really valuable as well. So as I said, each of the projects has signed up to those 4 aims. And so that's why, in terms of learning from the programme, the NFM programme has already delivered lessons learned part 1, and we're currently drafting part 2. It's nearly there, and I'll give you some insights as to what that's found in a couple of minutes' time. We've asked each of the catchment scale projects to provide us with a case study template, and that can be used to update the Working with Natural Processes evidence directory directly, and we can use that. If community scale projects want to deliver that, they absolutely can, and we would love them to, but we're not going to mandate that for them because we recognise that resources might not be as available. We've asked for data collection about the assets and the measures that have been put in the ground, and we're using ArcGIS Online, and that's hosted by the catchment-based approach to the Rivers Trust. And they've given a series of webinars about what it is that we're looking to collect and why. So it's this does start to capture some of the what measures have you put in place, where are they, what did it look like before, what habitat differences are we seeing there. We've got another report that we're asking projects to do, and this isn't a template. So if you're on there thinking, well, what's Jon talking about at the moment and scratching your head, I'm going to give some broad headlines of headings that we're looking for, because all of the other stuff is about what has happened on the ground. What I think we're possibly missing as the learning from the programme at the moment is kind of that method statement. So you plan to do this at the start, you've done this at the end, what changed between? Because I don't think there are many, if any, of the projects that have ended up delivering exactly what they'd hoped for when they put their bids in a few years ago. And that's not to say that any of the projects have done anything wrong, because projects do develop and evolve, and that's entirely right. And then a number of the projects are actually doing kind of project reports about what they've found. So the data capture, they've got universities involved, they've got other research organisations involved to look at what data is coming back. So whether or not that's sensed on the ground or time-lapse photography, that's all coming back so that they can use that to turn into something really useful. And that's what I should say, is that we've tried to be reasonable and proportionate about this the whole way through. So what we've not done, you must do X, Y, and Z in your monitoring. We've said, these are the things we would like you to monitor, and we've given a bronze, silver, and gold standard effectively, because not all projects have had access to the same kind of money for the monitoring. We wanted to spend money on the measures rather than on lots and lots of monitoring that would have meant that we couldn't have done so much, because you can gather data maybe through citizen science or other ways. So that's been a bit of a challenge in some ways, but lots of the projects have committed to delivering lots of data collection for a number of years. So this will be really valuable when we start to have enough data over a few years to make it statistically valid in terms of the conclusions that we can draw from it. So the first interim lessons learned report was published 2 years ago in January 2019. It had 16 or 17 actions, but you can sum them up into these 5. And this looked at the lifespan of the project from conception, so bid, through until business case, so the bit before you start the construction. And we were kind of really learning as we went through this. And project teams said that they required clarity on how project proposals would be assessed. That's entirely reasonable. If you're going to put in a bid, you want to know whether or not you're going to tick the right boxes and make it worthwhile to actually put in a submission. Timetables had been fixed before the practicalities had been agreed. So within the proposal for the project, we asked how quick do you think you can get this going? And then we kind of saying, well, you said you'd be at this point now and you're not. And I know that we put projects under quite a bit of pressure there, and that came directly from Minister Coffey, who was the floods minister at the time. And so, you know, that's learning that we take away. And actually those first 2 points, and even the third one about how you're going to assess the benefits before you say to somebody, assess the benefits of your project, you give them some rules of thumb, guidance, that's really important. And we've actually been able to use that for the innovative resilience funding. There's some of you may have referred to it as the £200 million fund that was announced as part of the budget back, I nearly said earlier this year, but it was last year, wasn't it? March time. So we've been taking that learning and putting it into other projects that we know where we are. And I'll just pause on that wanting information to assess the value of benefits for a moment, because one of the things about the programme is give guidance and not give instruction. And the reason for that is that I feel that when you give guidance, you give people the opportunity to see if it works for them, and if it does, great, and if it does doing it, then giving them that freedom to do that is really important to me. What I found is if you give people instruction, they're very reluctant to innovate in some of these projects. And when you're trailblazing, I think it's really important that you actually trailblaze. You're going to fall down the pitfalls, you're going to make mistakes, but you can learn from those, and that's what I wanted. So that's one of the reasons why I'm not going to sit here today and give you instruction on certain things. So I'll give you guidance around the edge so that you can see if that works in your situation. If it does, great. If it doesn't, what can you do from that position of guidance to make it better? The last 2 points there, engagement is crucial to form and sustain partnerships needed for natural flood management. I've said that kind of already, but every one of our projects is as a success because of the partnerships, the engagement that it has in place. So don't underestimate that need for engagement. And engagement to clarify long-term responsibilities is crucial. And I'm sure that somewhere on the call there is a question burning around long-term maintenance and liability. And that's really a nod to the fact that before you start going and doing things on the ground, you really need to have a good idea about who's going to maintain it, who's got the liability for it. And I'll just use this point as a bit of a plea. I don't think that all natural flood management measures need lots and lots of maintenance. So the ones that we always visualize first, or seem to be visualized first, are leaky structures, leaky barriers, leaky dams, whatever you call them where you are. They're the ones that we can quite easily kind of logically see in our mind that we build something out of the material that's won locally. It might not be as robust as we'd have done it if we'd have gone to builder's merchant and got some nice bits of timber, and then heavy rain comes down, it starts to rot, it breaks away, it gets caught in a culvert, and that seems very logical. But a lot of the things that are on our spectrum of measures that we're using, the 14 measures, aren't like that. So if you're going to reconnect a floodplain and you are taking down an embankment or something, then why would you need to do a lot of maintenance on it in the long term? And what's the liability risk of somewhere flooding that wouldn't have flooded before? So that leads us to some guidance, which I'll take you through a little later. But yes, maintenance and liability are a real issue. I'm not saying they're not, but I don't think they are as much of an issue for all of the measures as they are for some of the measures. And I hope that's kind of clear and helpful. The second interim lessons learnt report, which is being drafted at the moment, we approached this ever slightly differently. What we did is we asked project teams to tell us or rate the most important things or the most challenging areas, the things they wanted to tell us about in terms of the learning from the project. And top of the pile was permits and consents. Then there was something about monitoring, and that goes back to some of the monitoring and the information that I was talking about earlier, what we're looking for. Legal agreements, which actually, when you read in there, is very closely aligned with some of the permits and consents, but it is subtly different in terms of those legal agreements with farmers, and the maintenance and liability issue as well. And the key themes that project teams have given us as their learning is give yourself the time, make sure you're doing any engagement nice and early. And if you are looking at the longer term kind of monitoring and maintenance and legal agreements, then you need to talk to your landowner about that, and funding that comes in with that as well. Who's going to fund it, and what are the procurement methods around delivering that funding. They will the sort of things that are coming out. So as I say, this is an early draft, and that's where we are. I just thought this table was quite interesting though, and as I say, this is still draft, but it seems to me that excuse me, I can't find mute on the screen. It seems to me that generally the landowners are the people who are taking on the maintenance activities in the majority of cases. I think the NAs are in some places, they've agreed that they're not going to do any repair or replacement, but I'm not sure. I need to drill into the data. As I say, very early rough draft is where we are, but it's giving us an insight of where we are. The other thing I would say about the lessons learned part 2 is that this is a much more positive story that we're getting from projects as well. I think in the early days there were lots of challenges and it felt like there was a big mountain to climb. And now actually people can see the summit and they can see they've achieved good things, and project teams seem to be more willing and able to share some of the things that they've overcome, and most of the projects have overcome the big challenges they have had. But having read the early draft and the responses that we got back from projects, the one thing that I would say is key to all of this is engagement. And there's two elements to the engagement. There's active and there's information. And just to spell that out a little bit more, active is around where you're working with specific stakeholders to deliver something. So they could be your contractors, they could be your landowners, they could be your funding partners. They're the people that are absolutely engaged and part of your project and what you're trying to deliver. The information side is more of that kind of background, giving people an awareness if they want it. So is it a Facebook group? It could be a WhatsApp group. It could be a web page that's updated with some photos of what's going on. But what it seems to me is that the most successful projects have both of that element. So use face-to-face and phone call and web technology to engage with people directly who are involved with the project, but they also have an arm that is about giving information to the local community as well. In the meantime, it's not just the Environment Agency that have been doing research to learn about natural flood management. We've also had Defra's Enablers and Barriers to NFM, and I thought this was a great project. I say that I was part of the steering group with Defra on the project, but it looked to identify the barriers and enablers to delivering natural flood management work, and this was to help inform the policy statement. So they looked at who are the main stakeholders, what societal, regulatory and institutional barriers are there, what enablers are there of the same varieties, and what are the main enablers and barriers associated with different funding mechanisms. And I think it's fair to say that unlike some of the other work that we'd done about learning about natural flood management from the programme, this focused more on it from a landowner's perspective. And they did some great research and got some great answers, and came up with this roadmap, or a suggested roadmap on the enablers and barriers to delivering natural flood management. And some of the things that are on here, well, actually, I think having stood back from it, it links very nicely with the FCRM strategy and the action plan that will be published around that strategy later this year to show that we're delivering it. So, for example, the information hub, I'll talk about a piece of digital work, some funding, I'll tell you a bit more about that. Relationships are hugely important. Knowing who's got responsibility for maintenance and liability, and having the right guidance and information available for those that want to be part of the projects, and actually just bringing it to people that don't know anything about this. So that was a great piece of research and aligns with what we've picked up from other projects. As I said, I'm working on a digital project. This is again to make natural flood management an everyday choice for all. The discovery work that we started a year ago, so I shared with the project team everything that we'd learned from everywhere else, and they said, thanks, John, that's great. But what we need to do is we need to check a few of those things and see if they are things that lend themselves to a digital platform or a digital service. And they did that piece of work, probably interviewed some of you that are on the call. And we found 5 key areas that are challenges for natural flood management. That's finding land, funding, modelling, measuring success, and managing risk and liability. Excuse me 1 second. I hope I'm muted in time. And so we looked at trying to build something for the find funding service. Actually, we've taken a step back and gone, well, that's quite niche for a very small community of people really in England that know about natural flood management and know about it enough that they want to do it and are doing it, and they want to know how to fund it. So we're standing back at the moment and looking at seeing if we can provide a of information that will help bring natural flood management to life and be a resource for everybody. And in there, it might have guidance documents or instruction documents, depending on what it needs. We're thinking about what we can do in terms of maybe videos or other information that would be useful. As I say, all of this helps us update the learning on the evidence directory. We're working on some guidance. I'll tell you a bit about that, the funding updates, ways of working, and how we're sharing that knowledge. And all of this will go to help build and deliver the actions that are within the FCRM strategy. And there's an action plan going to be published later this year to help that delivery. So in terms of guidance, one of them is minimizing the risk. So this is about maintenance and liability. And what this doesn't say is that don't do anything because there's always a risk attached with it. What it says is do these things, but be aware of the legal risks, the financial risks, the reputational risks, and mitigate them as far as is reasonable and possible. And this is all about being reasonable and proportionate in what we do. And that's available on the CABA website. It's downloadable by anybody. As you can see, a couple of years old, and still being used today. The other guidance that we're working on at the moment, and I don't know what they're going to finally look like because they're being worked on, is some modelling guidance. So we're looking at generating some standards for natural flood management, perhaps even maybe a national NFM model so that you can look at your area. Whether or not that's the same as the potential maps or it's different, I don't know. But the evidence and risk team within the Environment Agency are looking at developing some modelling guidance. And we've got a design guide going on being delivered by Syria at the moment. And I've seen an early draft of it, and really this is going to focus on how to install the measures, what the best practice is, some principles, some rules of thumb. What that has also shown us is that there is a need for some more guidance on how we value the benefits of natural flood management, because the multicoloured manual, Treasury Green Book, all of these things, if you're writing a business case, are out there. They do link to working with natural processes, but they're not explicit in terms of what you're doing. But if you're writing a business case at the moment, my advice to you, keep it simple, be proportionate in what it is you're trying to do. You don't need to model the hell out of it to tell us there's a flood risk problem if you've got loads and loads of newspaper cuttings and it's really clear there's a flood risk problem. And take us on the journey. If you haven't got any data that's got provenance to generate some benefits, take us on the journey of what you've come up with so that we can say, it's a reasonable attempt. We might not like that, but actually we can see how your benefits have been calculated, and that's good. So in terms of funding, we've updated our partnership funding calculator because there's no pot of natural flood management funding in the next programme that starts in April. So this enables more natural flood management to happen because there's a new flood risk band in there, and there's an update for the environmental outcome measure 4 and the funding that they generate. Both of those, I think, will give more money to projects that deliver natural flood or are delivered by natural flood management measures. Those solutions will get more cash than they have done in the past. And within that, the allocation of funding there is £5.2 billion to protect 336,000 properties. There's some money in there for asset recovery, and there's the money that I talked about for resilience, the innovative resilience funding as well. So all of that in there to help generate more natural flood management in the future. But that's not the only funding that's available, and depending on who you work for, your community, what you've got access to, you may have far more access to a variety of different cash sources than we in the Environment Agency have. So there's some money out there for Nature for Climate, there's money for trees, northern forest, and that's without any private or kind of research investment that might be able to be used to support the natural flood management projects that you want to deliver for the communities around you. In terms of ways of working, I mean, these are probably more internal for the Environment Agency. And if you're going to try and get money from the Environment Agency 6-year programme, you need to know about the appraisal guidance. We'll look to update that to make sure that there's I'm hopeful that we'll get a reference in there that says natural flood management has to be considered. That doesn't mean to say it has to be the option that's taken forward, but has to be considered is better than lots of projects not even considering it at the moment. I've talked a bit about the design guide that Syria are doing. That will help to deliver more natural flood management and have more confidence that it's being delivered in the right way, and the modelling standards as well. We've also got a steering group within the Environment Agency and cross Defra group that are looking at the things that we can do to change our ways of working, our behaviours, team relationships, to make sure that we make more of natural flood management. And then metrics to measure what we're doing at the moment. That to me seems to be the number of projects or the amount of cash that's going to natural flood management interventions. But there could be some other metrics in terms of the consents that have been generated. And I think that gets more confusing where that's between different consenting authorities. It's not always the Environment Agency that consents these works. And in terms of where we are in international relations as well, so we launched the engineering with Nature and Atlas. I say we, the US Army Corps of Engineers did that in America. And of the 56 case studies in there, 10 are from the UK. And that is available to download, and I'm happy to share this presentation, and the link is on the screen for you as well. But it's not just the US Army Corps of Engineers. I've had conversations across Europe over the last few months talking about research that they're doing. In fact, Europe launched some research on natural flood management. They didn't want to necessarily base it all on UK stuff because we were leaving and have left the European Union now, but they found that we'd got the best examples of this. So make no mistake, the UK is kind of world leading in when it comes to natural flood management at the moment, and others are looking at us for some of their evidence. Obviously, other nations are doing great work as well. I'm not saying we are the head of the field, but what I'm saying is that others are looking to us at what we are doing, and it is groundbreaking. So in summary, the direction is for us to deliver more natural flood management in the future, nature-based solutions or working with natural processes, remembering that Venn diagram at the start. And we must integrate more natural flood management in our projects and programs because we want to make natural flood management an everyday choice for all. And we're trying to use the lessons from the NFM programme to deliver leadership, to deliver hubs of information, guidance documents, and to achieve all of that with the hopefully with the data that we capture to see how hydrographs are updated and change as a result of the work. So I'll finally say thank you very much to you all for listening. I think I was about on time. I might be a couple of minutes over. If you want more information, I've got a Knowledge Hub site that I look after, khub.org, and search for Catchment Scale Natural Flood Management Projects. Originally, it was open just to the NFM programme, but I'm hopeful to open it out to more and more people to share ideas, forums, wiki, documents on there. And you can email me, jon.hollis@environment-agency.gov.uk, or if you run away from this and you think, how can I get in touch with him? nfm@environment-agency.gov.uk as well, and either me or somebody in the team will get back to you on that. And with that, I will hand you back to Gerard.
Thanks, John. Excellent presentation. And we've got a few minutes for questions. We won't have time to cover them all, but you kindly offered to answer those that you could afterwards, so we'll post a note of those after the webinar on the website. John will need a bit of time to do that. Well, there were several questions that have come in around monitoring, so around funding, responsibility, what standards, somebody mentioned bronze, silver and gold standards, and perhaps monitoring of wider benefits as well as the NFM impacts as well. And somebody suggested, I don't know if this has been thought of, a platform on which to share results for monitoring. So sorry, there's quite a lot in that question, but if you could say something about monitoring, that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll take myself off mute and then you'll be able to hear me. So yeah, in terms of standards, that gold, silver and bronze kind of level was specifically aimed at the natural flood management projects in the NFM Programme. Guidance is available on the CABA website. So if you're outside of the programme and you would like to know what that is, then that's on the CABA website. The quickest way to get that at the minute is a Google search, but I will commit to getting a link shared. But if I'm honest, that might be next week at the moment.
Yeah.
I probably should explain that because that sounded cryptic. I'm currently homeless. I moved out of my house this morning. My good lady wife is there with the removal van at the moment, waiting for it to leave. And we haven't got the keys for the new place at this very moment. So I'm kind of focused on moving house at the moment, which will mean that I'll get the link over to everybody next week.
Okay. Thanks, John. Yeah, and I was going to say thanks really for going the extra mile in going ahead with the presentation today, because I know it's not ideal time for you. Thanks very much. So yes, there were another question we had sent in beforehand was, how do you go from strategy to projects for NFM?
Yeah, I take that. I mean, there's two ways you can talk about strategy to project. So the first one I think is from the FCRM strategy. So that sets the direction of where we're going. And so projects should try and achieve that. And in the business case, the strategic case, the first of the 5 cases in there, is all about that strategic case. So reference the 25-year environment plan, reference the FCRM strategy, absolutely. But if you're talking more about a strategy within a geographic area where, so under your flood risk management plan, catchment flood management plan, as they were, from that should give you a high level indication of what type of work you want to do within a catchment to maintain the current flood risk, to reduce flood risk, to take account of climate change, those kinds of things. And then really you should be looking at trying to deliver the solutions that achieve those outcomes. So I take it the question's probably more about the latter than the former, but making that clear link back up through what has been done before within the work within your local area or a high government level is really important to keep it in there, to justify what you're doing. But don't just look at the flood risk kind of management plans or strategies. Also look at what's out there in terms of any environmental strategies or environmental plans, because quite often those works can deliver flood risk management benefits at the same time.
Thanks. We've got about 1 minute to answer one more question. So somebody's asked, how have stakeholders and communities responded to NFM planning and implementation, the planning and implementation processes?
So I think generally communities have been really receptive to this. There's probably, if I'm completely candid, at the start of the programme, when we were looking for candidates, we probably looked at communities where we'd been trying to pursue hard engineered solutions that weren't going to get off the ground for their benefit cost ratio, for the availability of funding, that kind of thing. And I think in some places, some communities, or some may have seen them as a kind of a second class option, rather than being the all singing, all dancing solution they wanted. But generally, where we've worked with those community groups, I think they've responded really well, and particularly where we get community groups that have led the projects themselves. So I could name some within the community programme, but there are some really good community groups that lead the work, and I think by them doing that, it garners more support from the wider community as well.
Thanks, John. Yes, I'm afraid we've run out of time. So just to sum up quickly, if you do have feedback or follow-up questions for John, there's his email address, and there's contact details for the research programme as well. As I said, John will try and, as best he can, fitting around moving house and his other work, answer questions that we haven't had time to cover. The recording will be available on the website in the next 2 or 3 days. The next webinar on the 25th of February is going to be, we're going to hear from Dr. Stuart Clark from the National Trust on a land manager's perspective on natural flood management. If you haven't already, please do sign up for our newsletter, and you can access previous issues on our website. And if you do that, we'll alert you to future webinars. So yeah, we've run out of time. Just thanks again, John, and yeah, particularly for fitting it in around your house move. Good luck with that. Thanks to everyone for joining and for your comments and questions, and hope to see you on a future webinar. Enjoy the rest of the afternoon. Bye then.
Thanks, everybody. So others call, and I see you're still there. Are you able to download the chat or the questions that are there? Yeah. You can do that. I didn't know if I was going to have to try and scratch around to do that, but if you can do that, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you very much. Right, I'm going to go and see if I can collect some keys, but I'm not sure they're ready yet. So
yeah, good luck. All the best, John. Thanks very much.
Best of luck, John.
Thank you. Thanks, Jeff.
You're welcome.
Take care. See you all soon.
See ya.